keep
You said you
repeating.
didn't trust
You
him, but
keep
now you're
repeating.
defending him because you're saying
Okay.
that I should believe him when he clarifies, even though I don't think that he really is being very honest when he says that in the context of a siege being announced.
Okay. Yeah, this is a problem.
In the context of defending a siege against millions of people
but what
with
you
no
can't
food,
say
no fuel, no
is
water.
that he called them legitimate targets when the article that you were citing,
I
your
never
source,
said that he called
says
them.
the
I said
opposite.
they did not change that there would still be a total siege on the civilian population of Gaza that cannot
They are
leave.
not sieging the civilian population of Gaza. If they were sieging the civilian population of Gaza, they wouldn't let anyone out. They're sieging Hamas. Hate it, and they run with it because they hate the people that that are being lambasted by the tweet. And so, yeah, I think if you read something like what Syrian Girl writes and you don't look into it and you just retweet it mindlessly, there's some hate involved with there. Oh, thank God, gang. Thank God. Straighterade is here. I don't have to awkwardly talk to myself and you anymore. We can pull them on. Welcome. Hello.
Hold on.
Oh, you are very low.
I think that's because when I connected, your audio is coming.
Can anyone else hear her? I can barely hear her, just like very, very small. Okay, let her work on some audio issues, gang. We'll get it done. We'll get it done. Sulfur, if she's a troll, she's a very effective one. I don't know if she is or not, but even then, I think the post in question that I was commenting on, it was about the helicopter stuff, right? It was fake news about this helicopter. It was like proven wrong, but she was claiming that it showed the Israeli helicopters mowing down Israeli civilians, just firing indiscriminately into them. It was obviously false. It was proven false by several trusted sources. The geolocation, etc., did not match up with the claim. All sorts of reasons it was wrong. But yeah, that was what I was commenting on, and that had like 100,000 retweets, like hundreds and thousands of likes. It was viewed millions and millions of times. Again, people just running with it. And if you read the quote tweets, most of them weren't challenging it, but were using it as a way to like push their agenda. Yeah, it was pretty grad, pretty gross. So. Well, what Sulfur are you? I don't know what she's. Not Sulfur. See, I'm reading Sulfur in my chat, but I'm seeing Straighterade, and their names start with S, so I'm calling Straighterade Sulfur. I'm glad she was deafened. Oh, she's no longer deafened. Oh no. We'll get it. We'll get it done. Not all women are the same, Wick. I know. Forgive me, senpai. Forgive me, Sulfur. I know not what I do. I am but a silly man, a stupid man. Welcome to live tech support with Wick, where we help people get their audio sorted. You guys excited for this debate, by the way? I hope you are. I am. I'm curious to see her arguments. I did read the sources that Lycan sent me, because during our talk, if you will remember, if you will recall, Lycan made this claim several times that Hamas was suing for peace and Israel just wasn't having it. And I was very curious to see his sources on that. He did link me some sources. And so we will be probably going over some of that. We'll see, right? But we can see you just fine, Straighterade.
There we go.
Your audio is better, but it's still low. I have you up at 200% on my end. Can you just, is there a way to just crank it?
Settings.
Maybe just,
Did that
it's
change
much better. It's much better now.
Okay.
It's still slightly. What do you think, Gang? Can you guys hear her? Can you talk for a while and see if my audience?
How about now?
Much better.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it's still a little low, apparently. Yeah, if you could just keep going higher, higher, higher.
I think I've got it turned up as much as I can, but let me see. It might just be a matter of moving it closer.
Okay, there we go. There we go. There we go. My audience is satisfied now. And yeah. So first of all, hi, welcome.
Hi.
How you doing?
Doing pretty good. How are you?
Oh, so far so good. But now that you're here, I'm much better. I was like, oh man, is she gonna show up? And we're gonna have to
So sorry about the delay.
It is what it is. It happens. But you DM'd me the other day. And you wanted to debate me on something. Can you tell the audience what the debate's about today?
I did. So I've been following your content since October 7th. I listened to your call-in streams, your conversations with Socrates. I listened to the roundtable that you had on anti-Semitism on the left, and your other commentary. I've watched your Twitter, and you, like many other people, are very I don't know if moved is the right term, but are very interested in this conflict all of a sudden, even though it's been ongoing for decades, right? And I have followed it more than just I think people mostly end up spiking interest in it when there's bloodshed, unfortunately. And I have followed it a little bit in between that. And I just had a couple of questions that I wanted to talk to you today, namely the title of this, which is the bigger obstacle to peace, which is it Israel or is it Hamas?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that that is a question that is being had, not just amongst us, but it's being talked about on social media and the discourse all the time, right? Like, who is at fault? And I want to be clear, right? Like, I am, if they are both obstacles, right? If we want to be neither of them are working towards peace, and that is a problem. But when we talk about which one holds the onus of responsibility for what is happening today, right? I think clearly Hamas is the answer here. If Hamas had not engaged in what they did, we would not be seeing these bombs dropping. Now, that isn't to say that Israel holds no responsibility, and what they are doing is entirely justified. That's not my claim. What I am saying, however, in my stance here, is that if Hamas laid down its arms, there would be peace. If Israel laid down its arms, we would no longer have an Israel. And that is I guess, maybe a form of peace, but not a kind of peace I'm interested in. But I wanted to let you kind of have your opening thoughts on this, ask the questions you wanted to ask, and kind of lead the discussion. So I'm gonna give the mic to you and let you take it away.
So there will be two parts. I'll respond to what you just said, and I'm also gonna give you where I kind of had the idea for this. I saw you reply to a tweet. I'm not sure whose tweet it was, and it said pro-Palestine, pro-Israel. Nah, I'm anti-war crime, fool. And I was thinking, if you are anti-war crime, like most people probably would consider themselves to be, then I think you would be more staunchly anti-Israel, even though I don't really think of this conflict in that way. I just think it's kind of soy to look at it as this team sport of I'm pro-Palestine, I'm pro-Israel or whatever. But Israel, to ask you, do you think that the attack was unprovoked? I often hear people say that this attack in a lot of ways was unprovoked and kind of unprecedented.
October 7th attack, to be clear?
Yes.
Unprovoked. No, but, and the but's important here. Just like I wouldn't, if someone taps me on the shoulder, right, and then I reach out and slap them, that's technically provoked, right? They provoked me into it, but I think the response does not lie in proportion to the provocation done to them. So in that sense, was it a proportional attack that on October 7th that Hamas did? Was it in proportion to the provocation? Absolutely not.
But you would say that so you agree that there was provocation, but you're just saying that Hamas is disproportionate in their response. And the provocation being what? If in your analogy you just said Israel is just simply like tapped
No,
Palestinian
I wasn't comparing. I was just saying like the
just as an example.
yeah, as
Okay,
an
but
example.
like,
Yeah. So I think
what?
that to answer your question of what has Israel done to maybe make people in the Palestinian um, zones turn against them, I think the West Bank settlements are a great example of that. How they have been treated as well, they're not even citizens, but like as in this permanent refugee status. I think that especially Netanyahu's regime and their policies towards Gaza, the West Bank, etc., have all been atrocious and horrific. And yes, absolutely, they have. There are reasons that the Gazans are upset at them. Absolutely, yeah.
Right. I believe that, Amnesty International, which is, an independent human rights organization, has declared Israel to be an apartheid state based on the conditions that, separate Palestinians, even just Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis, for one. So agree with you there. And at this point, Netanyahu is already, was already very controversial and, seeing declining rates of favorability. But past October 7th, Israeli citizens in a lot of ways hold him in contempt and responsible for a lot of it because it was an unprecedented security breach. It was a military humiliation for Israel to
Absolutely.
have this incursion that was totally like logistically unprecedented for Hamas. I know that there's been talks that it's been in the works for a few years. There have been different factions and foreign backers that are involved that have said there hasn't been knowledge of this attack, that there was some knowledge. And all of that will continue to come out. I know the New York Times has already released some articles talking about, somewhat of like what Hamas's plans were. And I would agree with you there. But in your opening statement, when you said that, if Hamas simply like put down arms, I think that's probably like what I figured would be the like there would be peace in Israel. That's probably the biggest contention that I have because there have been a number of Israeli operations, as they kind of euphemistically call these massacres in the last 20 years that has led to just ridiculous amounts of civilian casualties for Palestinians. And like there was, pretext and provocations from Hamas as reported as that, Israel claims in response to these. But are they disproportionate? Yes. And they are committing war crimes. They are hurting lots of people, just to name a few. Operation Cast Lead, Operation Pillar of Defense, Operation Brother's Keeper, and Operation Protective Edge. Just with Cast Lead. In the wake of Operation Cast Lead, Amnesty International put out a report, an independent human rights report that they titled 22 Days of Death and Destruction because of the amount of civilian casualties and damage to Palestinian civilian infrastructure. And even now, like the current Operation Swords of Iron, people refer to as just the Israel-Hamas war, and I'm pulling up Haaretz this morning to see what the latest death count is. And according to what they refer to as the Hamas-controlled health ministry or the Gaza Health Ministry, 11,240 Palestinians have been killed, and there are still 239 hostages. Right?
Oh yeah,
And so,
it's horrific. But
mhm.
we have to ask ourselves a question, right? The same way we would ask, why would Hamas attack on October 7th? Why did they do what they did? We have to ask the same question of Israel. We can't just stop the conversation there, right? We have to ask, well, Operation Cast Lead, Operation Brother's Keeper, even the blockade of Gaza that happened after 2007, right? Why? Why did Israel do this? And what part does Hamas play in all of this? And who, right, is ultimately responsible for all of this? Now, again, I want to reiterate, I think that Netanyahu has blood on his hands. The Likud has blood on their hands. The IDF has blood on their hands as well. They have engaged in war crimes. I do agree. But simply to look at it from these individual incidences, right? And then extrapolate to everything that Israel does is a war crime, which happens all the time. I'm not saying that you're doing that, but I'm saying that that has been the claim of this whole operation that is happening right now is just a war crime, right? And I disagree with that. I don't think that holds up when you look at the international laws. I don't think that holds up when you look at just the moral justification for these things. And I don't think that holds up when you look at like what is the best path to an outcome for a peaceful region. And to be clear, I think that at this point it is pretty clear. Whether or not it will happen, I don't know. But the only path to lasting peace in the region is a 2-state or 3-state solution. But a 1-state solution at this point is just it's just not going to be anything but a travesty, a tragedy, a catastrophe. But let's talk a little bit about Amnesty International since you brought them up. In 2015, on May 27th, they put out a report on Hamas's summarily killing and torturing Palestinians during the 2014 conflict that they had. This is something that Hamas routinely, and again, to this day, engages in. Everything that they did on October 7th, they first practiced on their own people. Once again, these were people who were taken because they were even just working with Israel, right? Just towards peace. They would be, again, accused of being collaborators and taken and tortured. A few of them were even killed. And this has happened up as recently as 2020. Again, there was a individual, and I'll get their name up, hold on, Israeli peace activists via video conference. And the worst part of this was, right? So him and 6 of his fellows were arrested and tortured by Hamas for this. But the almost worse was that it was an Amnesty International reporter that outed them to Hamas. So Amnesty International has some issues, right? It has some good things it's done and some bad things it's done, but it's not exactly free and clear of bias in this. So I want to make that clear. And again, this is just when we talk about
that they're reputable or trustworthy in their reports.
Sometimes, most of the time. I would say most of the time, yes.
Most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I can link you, like, I don't know if you use media bias, factcheck.org.
I don't.
I do, and it will give you the like partisan affiliation or leanings of any sort of media outlet or news outlet, and as well as their rate of like factuality and how often they make errors, or even if they do make errors, do they retract those errors. And Amnesty International continues to be respected because it is, I believe the bias is only like center left, which is like liberal, and the factuality is very high. So to me, it continues to be trustworthy, and I know that when you say like there's bias, to the extent that individual people within Amnesty, every single person in an organization Certainly. Is going to have their partisan affiliations and leanings, unless it manifests overtly and in a way that is making the data that they're putting out in their reports unreliable. I kind of accept those biases and just keep them at the back of my mind, but it isn't enough for me to hand wave it or discredit it. I still do think that they're very reputable.
First of all, $100 from Lex Friedman. Great conversation. Well, thank you. I hope it does go well. And welcome to the stream. I agree with you. Like, we can't just toss a baby out with the bathwater. But we have to keep in mind, again, when we talk about actions by these individuals that might taint the data, I think that this is a clear indication. To its credit in this, Amnesty International did distance itself from this reporter after this happened, right? So, Amnesty International there. But we have to take into account the biases of the reporters in the area that, by necessity, right, they have to be at least able to work with Hamas, because otherwise Hamas would kill them, right? So they can't be too pro-Israel or else, right? They would literally die. And since the subject of this conversation, right, is which is the biggest obstacle to the path to peace, where we can criticize Netanyahu for shutting down protests in his country. Absolutely, he deserves criticism for that. But it is a substantively different thing than what Hamas does to collaborators, right? And Hamas's stated goal of simply wiping all the Jews in Israel off the map. Not just the state, but the people as well. And whereas, again, as you pointed out, Netanyahu crumbling. His support's crumbling, and there's every indication that after this, he's not going to be in power anymore. That makes him no longer an obstacle. And the obstacle that we can remove democratically is less of an obstacle than the one we have to remove militarily.
And there's two things there that you mentioned, and namely like the Hamas charter, what you mentioned with Amnesty International and Netanyahu. I'll start with Netanyahu. And to me, everybody who kind of wants to apportion the vast majority of faults and criticisms that they have with Israel is a little bit of like a convenient scapegoat to me. In the same way I felt people did this with Trump, and they looked at Trump as kind of the cause of a lot of issues in America rather than a symptom, and didn't want to, I guess, acknowledge or admit that there were a lot of factors that preceded his election that, you know, would get Americans on board to democratically elect somebody like Donald Trump, whose policies and, you know, politics could not be more different than mine and more different than a majority of Americans, because Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote, right? So I guess that when people would kind of just put so much blame on Trump, and, you know, all the criticism in the world he totally deserves, but thinking that the removal of Donald Trump or the ushering in of a new administration was kind of going to resolve like the majority of the problems, to me is short-sighted, because, you know, Netanyahu represents the face of the Likud party, but even if he exits as PM, which is, it's looking more and more likely, there will still be other members of the Likud party that continue to exercise a large amount of control.
Certainly.
This is at this point Israel's most like far-right government that's in power, and, you know, leading to these crackdowns like you're talking about, these very anti-liberal, anti-democratic measures like cracking down on protesters, freedom of expression for Israelis and Arab Israelis. And, you know, those all deserve criticism, but I don't like to see it as like he's the cause of the problem, without ever looking at like, well, what is leading Israelis to even democratically support and embrace parties like the Likud and Netanyahu?
That's a great question. Why was he elected initially?
A lot of that had to do with, you know, his promise to stop looking to create a Palestine, usher in a two-state solution. Right, which at one point had support among Israelis. At one point, it had support among Palestinians.
It did. Even as late as 2000, that was the Israeli government won an election on the idea of ending the occupation and creating two states. That was a winning elected idea, and this is after the far right assassination of Rabin, right? But the question is, right? That is one of the promises he made, but he also made another promise, and one I would argue was more central to why he was elected. His promise to the people of Israel was, "I will keep you safe." And then the question becomes, safe from what? What was happening that perhaps the people decided they might need protection from, right? What was going on at the time that the people of Israel abandoned their more left-leaning kind of representatives and decided to go more right? What was going on then?
Well, do we at least agree that he's failed in that mission?
Absolutely. His promise was a lie. I agree with you.
And, you know, part of the reason why it's looking like is because he has become so dependent on these far-right extremist settlers in the West Bank that there's kind of this very unsavory symbiotic relationship between the two. Like, the far-right extremist settlers need the Likud party, need Bibi in office to enact their agenda for Israel, which is, you know, illegally trying to expand settlements on what is internationally recognized to be Palestinian land.
Yep.
And Bibi has to continue to pander to this group to stay in office and to continue to exercise power within Israel. And so in doing so, he had such a fervor to kind of satisfy this very extremist base that he dedicated too much security to defending these settlers in the West Bank. Certainly not any of that going to defend any Palestinians that were the victims of these attacks. And that led to security breaches on October 7th, which, you know, made it difficult for
he should be held
the
to
IDF
account.
to kind of he should be
held
taken
to
out
account
of
for it.
he should be taken out of office.
Absolutely. I agree. Today, not wait. Look, I'm with you on this. If you are asking whether we should remove Netanyahu from office, we don't have a disagreement.
We don't have a
Yes,
disagreement there, but I think you see him as kind of like he's almost like most of the issue with
he's a
Israel, and that as
face of
soon
an
as
issue, but
was,
he is not the issue.
right?
I agree with you. There are settlers in West Bank. I don't know if you read the recent interview with one of those extremist settlers. I forget the name of the interviewer off the top of my head, but again, there is this kind of very, um, for lack of a better word, evil in the pushing out of these people from their homes, right? It's horrific, and it does merit some action and response. But when it comes to working towards peace, the reason that they're able to get away with that, the reason it's able to fester, is because the people of Israel, right, left, center, right? Even the left-leaning people of Israel. Again, I can reference you professors from Tel Aviv and other left-wing citizens of Israel that have, again, it's not all of them, but a large majority of them have been like, okay, we don't even want a ceasefire at this point, is because they are able to point to the threat, the real actionable threat that the people like Hamas, and Hamas is only one of many, right? We got the PIJ, we got some other, the Hezbollah to the north, we got a lot of Iran funding both groups, right? They feel that they are in an existential threat. And as, what is the quote? We would rather be, we would rather be despised and alive than pitied and dead. And so there is every reason in the world, and I think October 7th really kind of hammered that home to a lot of them, that there is no negotiating with Hamas. There is no path towards peace where that involves Hamas being there and existing. It's just, again, they probably can't dismantle Hamas as an entity on its whole, because again, they have their leaderships in Qatar, right, living the good life. But they can absolutely remove their ability to operate in the West, or in Gaza, I should say. And yeah, so.
I would say that they don't, because that continues to be sort of the stated goal of the IDF and all of those previous operations, which is that, like, yeah, we're going to get rid of Hamas this time. We're going to eliminate them. And even just given the plan and what has taken place over the last sort of month and a half, do you agree that's basically been a failure, and that is not really a realistic
I disagree. I
objective?
disagree. There's evidence, and we don't know, right? So I want to be clear. I can't predict the future. I don't have a crystal ball. But there's evidence that they are, in a very real way, having dismantled their ability to enact their will. Hamas's enact their will in Gaza. I think there is some evidence to suggest that, at least for a time, they will be able to at least get rid of them for now. Now, there are serious questions of what comes after. And I think this is where Israel is going to fail. Israel is going to fail because there's going to be a void created of leadership. Who will fill that void? If Israel isn't able to answer that question, they need to be able to answer that question. And if they can't, it's going to be a real big problem. And so we have to, I think our advocacy and our pressure should, this point, being on next steps. What is the plan of the day after tomorrow? There's a great article that was written in the Times of Israel by a man by 𝙎𝙪𝙗𝙧𝙞𝙗𝙗, right? Who wrote an article of that thing, talking about what needs to happen so that this does not happen again. And again, more evidence that the people of Israel, that Israel as a whole, is wanting to work to a day after tomorrow. Whereas, again, I can bring up you clip after clip after clip of the leadership of Hamas saying we're going to do October 7th again and again and again. We want Israel gone. And so when we compare these two, we could say they both have issues, serious structural issues. It's just not a contest on who's the bigger problem. I don't know.
I think that's where sort of the disconnect here is like you mentioned, like the Hamas charter, which the original charter had disgusting anti-Semitic things. I agree with you. At some point they updated the charter, but people don't really
in 2005. Do you know why they updated the charter? Because they were running for election. You know, they won their election in 2006. They run a plurality, not a majority. But the reason the blockade happened in the first place is because in 2007, after, again, a year after the election, they only won like 63 out of the 110 seats. I might have my numbers off there, but there was still people from the other group still had 44 seats until 2007 when they performed a coup and gave them all flying lessons, right? Everyone that wasn't them, they gave them flying lessons. And in fact, like the U.S. Secretary of Defense, right, was calling in, and again, they had contacts there, and Hamas picked up the phone. They're gone. You just have us to deal with now. And in response to that happening, that's why Israeli initially implemented the air, sea, and land blockade of Gaza, is because of Hamas's actions and
Yes.
literally just killing everyone that wasn't them in Gaza leadership wise.
And Egypt helps maintain this blockade, but
Yep.
the blockade is recognized by, you know, in these international human rights groups that we were talking about, to be illegal, right? And this blockade has been going on for more than a decade, almost. You know, we're approaching, like, I think 16 years, or like we're approaching 20 years soon. Do you acknowledge that the blockade is completely illegal, right? I realize that Israel has their stated reasons for why they feel the blockade needs to be in place, and it's for the safety of Israelis. But this is,
Do you
at the
think
expense of
it's
Palestinian
not though?
autonomy and rights.
Do you think it's that there isn't a demonstrated safety issue for the people of Israel, right?
But before I answer that, you agree
Sure.
that the blockade is illegal, right?
Uh,
Under
sure.
international
I mean,
humanitarian law.
but whether it's illegal or not, honestly, look, if I have to do something illegal to keep my kids alive, I might do that illegal thing. Now, immoral is a question I'm more interested in. Is it immoral? I would say to extend it this long, and how Netanyahu has failed to put other measures in place so that they can lift the plague. Absolutely, yes, I will agree with you there. But I just don't. I don't care about
So
illegal.
there was like an acceptable period under which Palestinians and Gaza could be placed under a brutal blockade like that you would find
Initially,
to
I
be
think it was
acceptable.
very wise to place them under a blockade after the terrorist organization that had said, "Hey, we're going to kill all of you." And hey, by the way, we just took over this government of the state and we killed every single one who opposed us. Yeah, at least initially, I think a blockade might have been okay, right?
Okay, so you're okay with the blockade with some caveats, right?
Sure.
Um, but the like even just on the discussion of the ongoing blockade and the context to Hamas even coming to office, and like you're saying, they got like a plurality.
It should never have been a perpetual thing like I think it has become. Like I think making it a perpetual thing is where it came from being okay to being not okay. And Netanyahu bears blame in that instead of fixing some of the issues and working towards peace, right? And working towards normalization. Instead he just sat on the blockade and did nothing. And that is where it became a brutal thing, and where it became an unnecessary thing, and where it became a very bad thing. Now, that said, I don't think they can lift the blockade today, because I think, again, Hamas has demonstrated what would happen if they were able to get into Israel, right? If they were able to get resources and get what they needed to get into Israel, Hamas has shown us exactly what they would do.
I guess the issue to me is like the context leading up to the 2006 elections in which Hamas, came to power within Gaza, is that the Bush administration had a policy of this idea of like democracy promotion. So these elections were encouraged and backed by the United States and urged on the people of Gaza to elect a new leader, right? And in the wake of the corruption of the PA and the PLO, I can get you the citation for this, but it's thought that as a retrospective, the reason why Hamas was able to, everybody's surprise, able to capture at least the plurality was less an embrace of Hamas and more of an openness or willingness for change, because Palestinians in Gaza were trying to reject the corruption that the PA and the PLO.
Certainly. I want to be clear. I'm talking about Hamas, not the people of Gaza, not the people of
Right.
Palestine. The people of
So,
Gaza
but
hate Hamas in a large part. Like, not all of them, right? But a large part of them do. Like, we had an interview that was shown today on Al Jazeera of a reporter in the hospital asking, interviewing an older gentleman, an older Gazan citizen, and he was like, why is Hamas, why is the resistance, as he called them, hiding with us? Why don't they go and hide in hell? Like, Gazans blame Hamas for this to a large extent, because again, the Gazans recognize who is to blame, and the reason why they're getting bombed today is because of Hamas, right? Just straight up.
I would say that I don't think that I know that Gazans don't have favorable views of Hamas currently, there was actually data that was conducted all the way up until the eve of October 6th, funnily enough. And your viewers can look at this on Foreign Affairs, that show that among all people in Gaza, so 2.3 million people, they only do a survey sample of that. I think around like 2,300 respondents, 30% still view Hamas favorably, but that's 70% that do not favor them, right?
Oh, yeah.
And elections have not been
Absolutely.
held for a long period of time
because Hamas won't let them be held. Yeah, absolutely.
again.
Yeah, I agree.
But I guess, do you not see how it's, to me, a huge issue for Israel to encourage democratic elections, for those elections to also be encouraged by the United States, which backs Israel, and then when they democratically elect Hamas, even if we don't like that choice, right? Jimmy Carter was in Gaza at the time of the elections, and he declared the elections to be free and fair. There was not corruption in that election. There was not foul play. They were democratically elected by the people of Gaza. To then impose a brutal and illegal economic blockade on the people for having chosen the wrong leader, effectively. And now that they have to, all of these civilians have to bear the brunt of a plurality of voters, voting for the wrong party in elections that were urged on by both Israel and the United States.
So again, it's my understanding, and let me double check because I want to make sure I'm clear on this, right? I want to make sure I got my facts straight. But it wasn't the elections that triggered the blockade. It was
there was an attempted coup between Hamas and the PLO.
So again, they didn't punish, and thank you for the gift subs, 𝕵𝖔𝖎, and I really appreciate the support, gang. So again, right? It wasn't the fact that they elected a plurality. That's not why the blockade happened. It's because this plurality that got elected killed everyone else, and so they were like, okay, we have to do something, right? We have to, and maybe look, I don't know if that was the best decision ever. Probably not in retrospect, but they had to do something, right? And perhaps they should have gone in and bombed them, right? But then we would have the same complaints that we have today.
Well, they have been bombing through these operations, right? It's not like they stopped bombing. It's been that. But I want to pull this up, right? Because the reason why I said that the blockade was the sort of ended up being a punishment for the election of Hamas. This is, not my opinion. I'm citing the opinion of the UN Human Rights Council. So there was a legal analysis conducted by the UN Human Rights Council. The year escapes me, but let me pull it up. And this, for anyone who wants to look it up, it was the report of the fact-finding mission, talking about the main question was, what is the reason that Israel has instituted this blockade, right?
Can you link me the report, please? I just want to follow along.
Give me a second.
And then I was telling my audience this. There's so much data, right, on this, going on this conflict from its inception. That, again, if you're familiar with it all, bravo to you. But no, I don't. I've never met anyone who isn't familiar with all of it, right? So.
Oh yeah, I mean, it could be an entire job just trying to follow this. Give me a second. Mission, UN, because I just have certain screenshots of it. Right.
I just again want to follow along. That's all.
This time might take a second here.
Okay. Yeah. And I do want to say, while you're looking at that, thank you for coming in and talking to me about this. I think that my views do need to be challenged on this. I think that everyone's views should be challenged on this. No one should just be swallowing propaganda on either side, right? They need to at least see because there's so much propaganda on this. Researching this topic, the extra point of difficulty is that there are people on both sides who are invested in making the other side look monstrous, and you have to kind of sift the wheat from the chaff when it comes to what is being shared and why it's being shared and who is sharing it. Like Jackson Hinkle has decided to make this his kind of cause celeb But we all know that Jackson Hinkle is not a trustworthy source, for example. So you have to just kind of. But that
Yeah, I
doesn't mean
wouldn't
what he's
recommend
saying is a
anybody tries
lie.
to get.
Right? Okay, sorry.
I would invite you like trustworthy, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean what he's saying is a lie. So you have to actually look at it, right? Like if he cites a source or something. But yeah, you just gotta keep this all in mind. And so, gang, if you're watching this and you are watching my takes on this and you are taking everything I say as gospel, don't do that. Look at it on your own. Research it on your own. Take what I say, check to see if it's true. Because, again, Wick, as beautiful as he is not perfect. And
Okay, I
so,
can only find the press release because I'm on like a different computer that's not mine. I have
fair
it
enough.
downloaded. It's not letting me send it, but the part that I wanted to read out. So this was the most authoritative legal analysis that was crafted by the UN. And it was chaired by a retired judge of the ICC or the International Criminal Court. To try to investigate like what is the reason for the blockade.
Justice Carl Hudson Phillips, to be clear, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
And one finding was the blockade was inflicting disproportionate damage upon the civilian population in the Gaza Strip, and as such, the interception by Israel could not be justified and therefore has to be considered illegal. So I know you said you don't really care about legality, but that's just speaking to that.
Sure.
And then two, this is mostly what we're talking about. One of the principal motives behind the imposition of the blockade was the desire to punish the people of the Gaza Strip for having elected Hamas. The combination of this motive and the effect of the restrictions on the Gaza Strip leave no doubt that Israel's actions and policies amount to collective punishment as defined by international law.
But then my question would be, why did they not do it as soon as Hamas was elected, right? Why wait?
And I wouldn't want to answer that because I don't want to give you incorrect speculation, right? But another issue is that, Bibi did assist in the funding of Hamas so that there would be rivalry between the PLO and...
That was a stupid idea and a stupid mistake.
There's a Times of Israel article, if people just look up like Bibi Netanyahu, Hamas, Qatar, in which someone part of the, close to Bibi talked about him effectively begging the government of Qatar to continue funding Hamas, and he basically said that anybody who wants to defeat, or prevent a two-state solution needs to be supporting Hamas, right? Because they don't want a reasonable Hamas or a reasonable.
Just one more reason that Netanyahu has to go. Absolutely.
So
yeah.
To me, it's like, is it right? Like I was saying, like all of that, and we got away from it a little bit. Was that is it right to punish a civilian population for effectively choosing the wrong regime after they encouraged democratic elections upon them, right? That were free and fair, even if we didn't like the choice. Just a plurality. So
but the question is, was that why they did it? And if it was, why didn't they do it when the election happened? Why did they wait for Hamas to kill a bunch of the Fatah, right? And that's a question, right? I don't know the answer. You don't know the answer. Like we don't.
I can't know. And I'm not an expert on this. Obviously, I'm just a layman. So I just defer to fact-finding missions like the UN and these respected international bodies that are impartial and can conduct retrospective and give.
Do we think the Human Rights Council of the UN is impartial when it comes to Israel?
I would say yes. Why?
Well, simply because I just do not think that's true. I think that's it has shown that it is not impartial when it comes to Israel. We can look at the very recent. Well, first of all, Iran sits on it, so there's that. And second of all, we can look at their resolution that was promoted by Canada to condemn the attacks on Hamas. It didn't pass. They didn't condemn it. So when you fail to condemn, again, the October 7th attacks on Hamas, I think that you're probably not unbiased when it comes to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. I don't know. It's just a suspicion I might have. I could be wrong, and I'm not going to die on this hill, but that is something that gives me pause. But if you're not willing as a body to condemn the attacks on October 7th, I don't know what to tell you.
I don't have issue with people criticizing these. I just don't like, people completely outright dismissing them because they may have one or two issues with them, because I don't think that makes them irredeemably problematic, and that you have to assess each decision and resolution that they pass or attempt to pass. You have to contextualize that. You have to ask, and see on an individual basis, is this something that merits criticism or not? But I don't think it overall, really ruins the credibility of the UN, in my opinion. And like as far as other resolutions that like can't be passed, so like almost every year there is a resolution that is called the Peaceful Settlement of the Question of Palestine. And they vote on it every year, and around like 150 countries will vote yes, this should be settled. And of course, namely among those that refuse to vote yes are the United States, Israel, a couple of other, smaller nations, places like Australia and like Guatemala end up abstaining from it. So, in the same way you're perplexed
Sure,
that
but
like why can't they
why
attack
does the U.S.
be
do
condemned?
that?
It's like, well, why can't this be, this
Yeah.
conflict that's been ongoing for so long that, only is, relative to other ongoing international humanitarian issues. Israel is the size of New Jersey. Israel has like I think 15 million people. Palestine is populated by 2.3 million people. The West Bank, a few more. Like, why is it that this conflict has not been settled? There's always just this talk of like, it's always an emphasis on the process, the peace process, but then it ends up being more process than peace. Like, why is it that it can't be settled? And that was already an obstacle before Hamas had even come to democratic power, right? Long before 2006, there was an issue with settling this, and it will be there long after. What's going on now? Like, even just if I could talk like just briefly about like what Gaza is, because we kind of just talk about like the blockade, and I don't know if people really have like a good idea of like what it means for you to be in a territory that is under a brutal economic blockade and an ongoing military occupation, right? So Gaza is among one of the most densely populated areas in the whole world. It is more dense than Tokyo. It's less dense than Singapore. It has 2.3 million people.
62nd most populated.
Right. It's universally described in, by many as one of the most densely populated areas. So there's no kind of like talking about that. It's extremely dense. And then on top of it, just the size, right? It's 5 miles by 25 miles. So it's shorter than the length of a marathon. And half of the population of Gaza is children or minors. So people under the age of 18, people under the age, I think 40% are under the age of 15. So it's still a lot. Just, I've seen so many people be like, yeah, the children of Gaza, because I guess they think that like a lot of it is like 15 to 17-year-olds, but the only people who I hear try to argue that like 15 to 17-year-olds aren't really children are like creeps, in my opinion. So those are still kids, right? You're you're a teenager, you're highly impressionable. They're very, very young.
Mm-hmm.
And then 70% are refugees or the descendants of refugees, because the question of Palestine has never really been settled. So a lot of these people don't really have a true national identity. They're not American, they're not Israeli. That continues to be unsolved. And given not just the context of like the past the operations, right, and like the density, like all of the continual bombardments and operations that have been conducted, like what does that do to a population of people that for the most part nobody is going inside Gaza and nobody is leaving Gaza, with very, very few exceptions. I think they issue about 40,000 work permits, but 40,000 in the context of 2.3 million being the denominator, that's like less than 2% around there, right? And all of these people being collectively punished for Hamas, which according to the United States has 20 to 25,000 members, according to more recent estimates by the IDF.
40,000.
30,000, 40,000, right? And now they're talking about like how much of it operates in tunnels, right? How much of Hamas is operating in tunnels, which kind of begs the question, if we know that they have foreign backers, right? If we know that they have not held elections in a long time, if we know that they're operating in tunnels, why is it that Israel is conducting an aerial bombardment and bombing hospitals, refugee camps, bakeries, civilian infrastructure?
It's
gave
weird.
A 24-hour notice to get 1.1 million people to, flee, and then as they're trying to leave the Rafah crossing,
extended.
like,
To
bombing
be
them.
clear, that 24-hour notice was extended, and
right.
because of Biden, to be clear. And I want to make.
I was about to say, like, if we just talk about what Israel's plan was before they had to succumb to international pressure, right, and pressure from the United States, and international outcry, which is certainly better than nothing. There were statements made by their defense minister, 𝕎𝙬𝙗, saying that we are dealing with human animals, and this is in the context of them announcing their complete siege in which there's not going to be food, there's not going to be water, there's not going to be fuel admitted to these people, right? So he makes that's one statement of dehumanization. The President Isaac Herzog on October 8th making the statement and implying that civilians in a lot of ways are responsible for October 7th. Let me
He
pull
did,
up, like,
but then he was challenged on that and said, "Are you saying that they're all the civilians are legal targets?" And the minister says, "No, I did not say that." So he did push back on that. But I agree, yikesy statements, very bad.
He did, but
Condemn,
in the
disavow, all
context
bad. Yep.
in the context of him announcing a total siege that's going to affect more than just Hamas, it's going to primarily affect like civilians. Do you think that when he kind of walks that back gently, but they still announce the siege, does he really mean that? You know, did he speak? Do you think he spoke artfully the first time?
It's a fair question, and to see if he really really meant that, we have to look at their behavior, right? What did they do? How have they done it? And you did bring up hospitals and things being bombed, and it's really weird to me how the IDF has faced almost no resistance going through Gaza until they get close to the hospitals. Then all of a sudden they're engaged in these massive firefights. Curious. I don't know why that could be. Like what reason that could happen. But no, let's talk about it, right? And let's see that, again, initially, yes, only 24 hours notice, very bad. I condemned it. Biden condemned it. A lot of people condemned it. A lot of people pushed back. It was extended to over a week, right? Shutting off food, water, power.
If Israel had it their way, they would not have extended it, right? They would have only given them 24 hours to do that.
But this is the thing. We can work with Israel and pressure Israel, but we can't with Hamas. There's a reason no one pressured Hamas, right? Because we all knew and understood that they're not going to listen to us. No, they don't give a shit, right? So again, point in my favor of who is more to blame for the peace process, we can influence Israel. We cannot influence Hamas.
I would say that the United States, given that they're a client state of ours, and the considerable amount of leverage that we have over Israel, is not really attempting to assert that leverage for whatever reason. You know, I feel like at this point, the United States, as this continues to go on, is basically in a murder-suicide pact with Israel, because it seems like all of the negative press,
murder-suicide pact? Do you think what?
Oh, absolutely. Because do you think that this bodes? Do you think for the most part, 11,000 people bombed in less than 2 months. You know, more children bombed and killed in like a month than were killed in all of the war zones in 2019 for the year 2019, wow. 2020.
In a month, if we're talking total, that's just not true, right? But if we're talking, so like, yes, in the last month compared to Syria and other conflict zones around the world, yes, unfortunately, and it's a horrific thing, more children have died. But if you look at the whole of the conflict in Syria, for example, no, that again the number is dwarfed by Syria.
Here, wait, give me a second. Hold on.
Yeah,
I will show you the citation that I was reading. It's real.
Like all the well, not all, but there's a lot of the photos going around showing Gazan suffering is. A lot of them, the fake ones, are from Syria, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like when people do that. It's pretty disgusting.
It is.
It was this.
Okay.
This press release, and if you're wondering, like, what is the authenticity of this organization? This I could find it from CNN.
It's Save the Children, to be clear, right?
Yeah.
Look, it's asking me to stay on the.
And just read the If you could just read
the number of children reported and killed in Gaza in just 3 weeks has surpassed the annual number of children killed across the world's conflict zones since 2009. Say the children said. I press an X to doubt on this one. I don't think this is correct.
No? Yeah. CNN reported on this.
I think it's wrong. Like they also look. CNN, the New York Times also reported that the IDF bombed that hospital and killed 500 people. Turned out to be incorrect. So again, I don't have anything at my fingertips to show you that this is wrong, but just look up the number of lives lost in Darfur or in Syria or in any of these conflict zones when it comes to children. And yes, it's probably I'm gonna bet the bank on this. Probably more, but I could be wrong. Maybe I am.
I disagree. I think the figure is accurate that Israel has bombed more children than those war zones. But even like on the hospital thing, right? Like, that was such a big story for like a week, right? And it was kind of going back and forth with like testimony and like video calls and trying to use satellite image to determine like who had done this. Was this part of a like rocket misfire from Hamas, or something, or some sort of projectile from Palestine, or was it like shrapnel or some sort of part of a missile from Israel, right? And it was initially reported that it had been Israel, and then they reversed course on that. And when the spokesperson Miller for the State Department, I believe, for Biden administration, when he was asked, would you conduct an independent investigation to see what the root cause of that particular hospital incident was? You know what he said?
I don't know what he individually said. No.
He said no.
Fair enough.
So he said that the United States would be refusing to conduct an independent investigation.
Did he say why?
And yes, he did. He said it. I can pull it up, a transcript of what he said.
Because I can imagine a lot of reasons to say no to that. Like, for example, we don't want to step on, like, there's a reason we have jurisdiction, right? In America, when a crime is committed, and it's not always the FBI investigating, we have jurisdictions, right? So I'd imagine that it could be a perfectly acceptable answer to say, nah, we don't want to step on their jurisdiction toes, right? But we do have evidence about the hospital bombing that, again, at the very least, calls into question the initial reporting on that, right? I think that the New York Times was especially galling, showing a picture under their headline of an entirely different spot in Gaza that had been bombed. And again, the implication being that that was the hospital, that was the damage done, that was what happened there. And it turned out to just not be true. So yeah.
Yeah, so this was the U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller answering whether the U.S. would support an international investigation to the Gaza hospital bombing. This was October 19th, and I'm going to link it to you. This is the press release from the White House. And the part that I want to read
can you give me like a page number? Or
yeah, if you search and find initial assessment, it should come up. And I'll read out loud where it says, like, question. Okay, and finally, just on the attack on the Ali hospital, you said that you're sure that actually it wasn't the Israelis who did that. And Mr. Miller's response was, I said it was our initial assessment based on the information that is available to us. Let me just say I don't want to play media critic here, but I will say that I do think this event was a reminder of everyone, this includes officials in the government, but officials in the government, everyone that watches the conflict, that commentates on it, it would be wise for all of us to take a beat and pause and collect the information. The end of that says, we stand up here every day, we defend Israel. I would hope that everyone who is watching what's happening would not take claims from a terrorist organization at face value. I agree with him on that. Hamas is not a trustworthy source. I would never cite a Hamas source.
I don't think anybody does he say he's not okay with an independent investigation?
Right after that. So he says, like, they just want to make sure that he's saying for sure that we don't believe that the Israelis did it. We believe that Hamas did it. And so it said, question, sorry, Mr. Miller, yeah, question. It's precisely because of that in the region, as you know, there's mistrust over the Israelis saying, and actually the U.S. position as well, because there's previous administrations that took us to war in Iraq on a lie that was defended on a very high level, including behind this podium. That's why people are cynical when you hear something. We might not know the truth, but would the United States support an international investigation? They get cut off, Mr. Miller. I do not believe that is appropriate at this time. The Israeli government has released a great deal of evidence to support their contention that this was a misfire rocket attack from inside Gaza that unfortunately landed on the hospital and killed, it looks like, hundreds of civilians. The U.S. government is conducting its own assessment. I would just say from Hamas's side, we've seen a claim backed up by zero evidence, and it's unfortunate that a lot of people believe a claim from a terrorist organization in absence of them having provided any evidence at all when you're seeing the Israeli government provide evidence. Okay. So I know that the Israeli government did provide evidence, but I don't see how, if you're completely sure that Hamas did this and was responsible for this particular hospital attack, what would be the problem with conducting an independent investigation unless the United States is covering for Hamas, which doesn't make sense to me.
Wait, right? That's the only reason you can think they would say it's not appropriate to have an investigation in a war zone at this time?
I'm saying that's a side effect of, by them saying it's not appropriate to conduct an independent investigation. They've already squarely placed the blame on Hamas. They said, we know for sure that they have done it and that Israel's provided evidence that they're not. Then an investigation would actually confirm that and only make it positive. That would be something that they could waive and show people. We have incontrovertible proof and an independent investigation that verified that Hamas did in fact bomb this and it wasn't Israel.
Okay.
I feel like one of the main motivations
no one would
to
be
not allow
convinced by
independent
that. But I'm like anyone who's okay. So you can give, and this is the same with flat earthers, this is the same with 9/11 truthers, etc. No matter what evidence you give them, no matter how official it is, and in fact, the more official it is, the more it will be doubted in some cases, right? And
flat earthers, sure, but I'm just talking about general, regular Americans and anybody who's following this conflict, and just regular civilians in all developed and non-developed countries. I think that for the most part, an independent investigation by something like the UN, by something like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International, would only make a stronger case to indicate that this was in fact from Hamas, especially if the United States is claiming it. But what they're effectively saying is that you should trust the Israeli government, you should trust the United States independent investigation, right? But why can't there be an independent investigation that's completely impartial, that is not biased by neither Israel's interest nor the United States' interest? You know, I will just say that I'm perplexed by that, because that comes off that if you're entirely sure that it's Hamas, why would you cover for them?
When it comes to Israel-Palestine, it's hard to find an unbiased actor. Let's just be clear, right? It's very, very hard to find an unbiased actor in this conflict. And I would admit that, yes, there's a reason that people don't trust the United States investigation of this, is because they see the United States, as you probably do, as a biased actor that has interest in this region, right? Mm-hmm. This is true for most of, like, even if we got NATO to do it, people would just say, oh, that's just America pulling the strings, right?
Well, I was going to say, I feel like NATO wouldn't exactly be impartial, because that
exactly, right? And whereas people would say on Israel's side, right, oh, the UN isn't impartial here. Like, got Iran sitting on the Human Rights Council right now, right? They're not exactly in our favor here. And so, again, it's hard to find an unbiased actor. The reason that I think that the situation in the hospital is a good kind of litmus tests for what kind of level of acceptance people would have for the information is because there were independent sources that were verifying this stuff. Like, it wasn't the U.S. Department that convinced me. It wasn't the Israeli information that convinced me. It was, again, seeing the geolocation of the rocket, seeing the videos, seeing the evidence on the ground of what happened, hearing, again, all these reports coming in, the fact that no shrapnel or anything like that was found on the scene from the rocket, so we couldn't test that. Like, again, maybe, and I would agree with you, eventually it might be a call to have an independent investigation, but in the middle of a war zone during this operation, I don't know, right? I could see it being not appropriate.
I hope the Biden administration reverses course on that. I think it would be appropriate, because I do think that it's important to, in the fog of war, not allow there to be kind of open inquiry and journalistic access to, or journalistic access to this area, even though it is dangerous, right? So we can get accurate, factual, independent, on the ground reporting as things are happening, because some of the reason why they don't want investigation, this goes both ways. There are reasons for everybody to champion this, because the longer you wait to conduct these investigations, the longer that if Hamas is responsible for something, they can cover up evidence that could have been key in kind of indicting them, or vice versa, right? Any party that's there that has, committed some sort of legal wrongdoing or atrocity, the longer that you wait, the easier that it is. And I like there to be cooperation among, like, respected countries, like Western countries especially.
Sure, why not? I'll give you this one.
These,
yeah,
right?
Sure, I'll give you this one.
I just surely a weapons inspector, like a professional weapons inspector, can tell the difference between a Hamas rocket and shrapnel from an Israeli missile, whether it misfired or something like that. So, I hope the United States reverses course on that, because I think these things really do, I know that there are some people who will, no matter what evidence you present them with, it's just more evidence against it, right? Like the conspiracy mind, right? But for the most part, I think, open access to these things does restore faith in people being able to say for sure one way or the other, get an accurate picture of what's going on the ground, right? Because I do think it's a precarious position for civilians to be in, to only be able to rely on the State Department of any country. I'm not speaking just specifically to the United States. So only Canada, only Mexico, only whatever country it is. Kind of we shouldn't. It's more of a trust but verify thing, right?
My concern here, right, is that it is in the middle of a war zone, and again, I am not a legal expert. I am not an expert on investigations during in the middle of a wartime. But again, as you said, the most densely packed, one of the most densely packed cities in the world,
Mm-hmm.
the 62nd most densely. I Having an independent source that is able to be safe and able to get accurate information there while there is an ongoing operation, it's going to be fraught. So I can understand and fair. Like I don't blame you for hoping the State Department reverses course. And fair
Mm-hmm.
enough, right? There probably should be, if it's possible, an independent, verified source on this. Absolutely.
The
But
reason why I guess I just don't like the
yeah,
lack of cooperation is because if there's a lack of cooperation and these independent councils and organizations start to render agnostic or neutral judgments about um, like what went on, like if Israel doesn't want to cooperate with an independent investigation, they say, well, there's no wrongdoing here because like they weren't allowing us basically to investigate, then that only incentivizes countries to actually have more opacity and like not allow people in to verify because they know that even if we don't cooperate, apparently we kind of get just like a neutral judgment, right? Like they can't say that we were clean, but they also can't say that we did anything wrong. So I don't like this, I
okay,
guess, kind of exclusion of like journalists being
sure,
able to go into this. There are already people within the Israeli government that are being outspoken about other members of the Israeli government trying to deny freedom of information requests,
yeah,
using kind of like the shroud of war to say like, well, things are too chaotic right now because you never want to. That's like now is kind of the litmus test and the most important time to be rigorously upholding those standards and principles like freedom of the press, free speech, free inquiry, free protesting, right?
mm.
Like there is kind of an impulse for people for security reasons, right, to kind of like let these liberties slowly be eroded, but you don't want like Patriot Act
I
2.0,
understand.
right? Or like
No, I
Israelis
get
don't
you.
want that to
I
happen.
agree with you. I agree with you, in fact. But again, like Israel isn't the only one not wanting people to go and investigate right now. Hamas is Hamas is doing its best to not let independent investigators in as well. They let their own people in, obviously, and people sympathetic to their cause. But yeah, it's a fraught situation either way. So fair enough. I'll grant you that yes, there probably should be into all of this, to be clear, into the October 7th attacks. Everything should be independently verified as much as we possibly can. There are time crunches on this information, though, right? Like unfortunately, in some cases, I think the time has already passed, and
Elapsed, right?
yeah, and that's is what it is, right? We don't have infinite resources, and we have to choose where we focus on. Um,
Right.
but I
I
think
guess
this
that's
all is
what I don't
distracting,
like is
though. This is all a distraction from the original conversation. We do realize that. So, regardless of who bombed that hospital, IDF or Hamas, and even if it was the IDF, war crime, cool, shouldn't have done that, really bad. We get to the question again. How? Let me ask you this:
Mhm.
do you agree that Israel should have had a military response to the events of October 7th? That when Hamas did its thing, that they should have retaliated somehow in a military fashion?
I think Israel has the right and the responsibility towards their civilian population and to their own military to secure the safety of every man, woman, and child living in Israel at the time to make sure that they are safe and protect their own citizens defensively, right? This offensive response that I'm seeing, right, or what they claim would probably be defensive, this Operation Swords of Iron, I don't see a good
So,
reason to be conducting themselves. I do think that like from day one, there should have been a
so you
ceasefire.
don't think they should have? So from day one, so October 7th happens.
And I'm parroting what was the U.S. State Department's line really
Okay,
quick. Like
okay,
Anthony Blinken tweeted right after in the wake of the attack, calling for a ceasefire, and then deleted it within the
yeah,
hour
because it
and
was
said we
stupid.
uncritically
To be
stand
clear,
with
and it
Israel.
like calling for a ceasefire the moment it happened, right? What? So let me interrogate this a little bit. So again, to be clear, what you're saying is that again, October 7th happens. 1200, I think, is the official number now, right? They don't have Gazan's super technology where they can automatically identify and count the bodies like right there. So they have to go through it like old fashioned way. And so it's fluctuating, but I think the current count is the 1200 civilians. Um, they come in, they murder and slaughter. 1,200 civilians, and well, not all civilians. Some were IDF. Let's give you that. 1,200 Israelis get killed. They retreat back. Israel does nothing militarily. They ceasefire.
No. Not nothing, but the
militarily, to be clear. I'm not talking diplomacy. I'm talking militarily.
But not talking about diplomacy or anything that
I'm
is
talking
just
a military
matter of
strike.
Defense. Yeah, I don't think so. No, I don't think that they should not be. No, they should not be retaliating in this way because given everything that I outlined with what these circumstances are because of the blockade and 2.3 million people being there. So like we talk about security.
So not even special forces being dropped in to target them and go through the tunnels. Nothing.
Oh, if you were asking me like initially, right? Like right after in the wake of it.
Yes, that was the question. Initially, should there be any kind of military retaliation at all?
But I don't like special operations to go in and try to target specifically Hamas. Yes, then I would agree with you. Okay. Right? Special forces doing that, then I would agree with you. But this
that's not a ceasefire, to be clear. Right? That wouldn't be a ceasefire. That would be them coming in and killing Hamas. Right?
Immediately in the wake of it, do I find it appropriate for them to say that we definitely have this plan to be able to do it? I wouldn't personally trust it, and my reasoning being that if they had a security failure that could not foresee the incursion that Hamas led against the fence that keeps the partition between Gaza and Israel, if they don't have the intelligence to have insight into an attack like that, how do they have the insight so quickly to say we know where Hamas is, that we could specifically target them and carry out a special operation within the next 24 hours and definitely for sure not be in violation of international law and not cause reckless harm to civilians?
Well, there's a few things with that, right? So one of the reasons is the security, again, we're going to be investigating this for a long time. I don't want to put out misinformation. This is just my gut, gang. I want to be very clear. I don't have any special access here. I don't know. This is just my best guess from statements that have been made on various occasions, right, by various people who are in a position to know more than me, is that Netanyahu, the Likud, the IDF thought of Hamas as kind of a joke, right? They didn't take them seriously. They thought they were kind of like toothless. And so they weren't really worried about them being able to successfully carry out an attack at the magnitude they did. It didn't mean that they didn't know who they were, where they were, that they didn't have intel on Hamas at all, right, and its locations. It just meant that they didn't take them seriously. In fact, there is some evidence to suggest that Egypt tried to warn them that something was coming like this, and they just kind of brushed it off, right? There is something. Again, we don't know. This is supposition. Please take it large grain of salt, but this is kind of what we'll find out in the coming months of when we if that's the case, just if I may. If I may, just real quick, but to act as if they didn't have any ability to strike back at targets or try to rescue the hostages, I don't know how to talk to you about that, because I think that we all understand that in any other country that is attacked in a manner that they would have the ability and, in fact, the responsibility to try to strike back at the entity that had attacked them in the first place, and to get their people back at the very least, to go in and try to rescue the hostages. No?
Then what is the purpose, for example, for things like total siege? Why can there not be food, water, fuel administered to just the civilian population?
I think that was a bad thing. What is the
military advantage of that?
There is none, and I think that was a bad thing. I think they should like, I can understand like cutting off fuel and power, but food and water, no. I think that was and I'm glad that they reversed course on that.
I would not, I guess, agree with you with saying that fuel isn't essential, because the fuel is necessary to run the hospitals.
There's plenty of fuel in Gaza.
Hospitals have, and yes, you're going to say Hamas has it,
yeah.
But we have no way of knowing whether they are or are not. And this is not me carrying water for Hamas. I'm just saying the question is not clear. If hospitals continue running, where they are getting that fuel. So if Hamas has fuel, and their hospitals continue to run, even though some hospitals have already been depleted of fuel, I don't know whether or not Hamas is giving them that. I don't think, from what I can see, that Hamas is very interested in administering aid to civilians. I don't think that they really care about most civilians. I think they don't really exist to govern Palestinians. They exist to try to
wipe out Israel.
To be a resistance force to Israel, which is the occupying power. But yeah, there's a huge disconnect there. But, Israel controls the fuel. They didn't need to end up punishing all of these civilians. And withhold that. Like people who are on life support in these hospitals will die if they don't have fuel. Newborn infants that are in need of like neonatal care will die if they don't have this fuel, right?
Yeah.
There were bombings of a convoy of different ambulances. Like, how is this acceptable to me? Because again, if they are saying that Hamas is
Wait,
inside
is it
tunnel,
still an ambulance if the ambulance is driving around Hamas resistance fighters, quote unquote, right? If they're all got their RPGs, they're in their sneakers, and they're got their AK-47s, and they're driving around to the various targets, is it still an ambulance at that point?
If you just said though that we know that the IDF is saying Hamas primarily operates underground under hospitals and tunnels, right? What is it rational to assume that Hamas, even though they have fuel, they have water, they have food underneath in this tunnel networks, that they are going above ground and getting in hospital and ambulances and riding around for fun?
Who do you think the IDF is having firefights with in Gaza?
But do you think that Hamas is doing that?
Yes, I think Hamas is absolutely doing that. I think Hamas is absolutely fighting the IDF. I think 66 IDF forces have been killed in combat in Gaza.
To fight the IDF, yes, right?
So how do they get there? Right?
But why would they? Is it rational to assume that they would be, when they have the underground network and they have medical care underground in these tunnels, like according to the IDF, why are they going up and risking being caught in ambulances and turning on the sirens so they can be bombed?
Well, to provide cover so that they don't look like the targets that they are. It's camouflage, right? It's a reason that Hamas wears civilian clothing, which is a war crime, to be clear. They dress in civilian clothing. They don't wear uniforms, right? They wear the sneakers, the jeans, the t-shirts, and stuff like that, in order to blend in around them and be camouflaged. So the IDF, who, surprisingly enough, does try to limit civilian casualties, won't just immediately blow them away, right? And that's absolutely how they operate. They they come out from their tunnels, they get into their vehicles, they perform their strike, they get back, they go back in. That's how they're doing it. And there's a reason that they're fighting more and more heavily when we get closer and closer and closer, or the IDF, I should say, gets closer and closer and closer to their bases of operations. Is because they have no more room to maneuver. That's where they've been operating from. That's their fort, if you will. And much like any kind of fort, it's where all your supplies are. And if you get cut off from that, you're gone. And so that's why they've been doing that. Absolutely is why they've been using
Israel
civilian...
meaningfully trying to curtail civilian casualties
and meaningfully is an interesting word.
From Hamas when they're announcing things on October 8th, like no food, no fuel, no water, nothing. And this is according to the Associated Press News as of November 3rd, 2023. The average Palestinian in Gaza is living on 2 pieces of bread a day, according to a UN official.
Yeah, I already said that I was.
But that is within Israel's purview. They could be giving them
food.
But
Israel, instead of doing that, have said, get out. They've said, evacuate. And we have evidence that they have been protecting them from Hamas, who is trying to keep them from evacuating. As one individual on my show, in fact, a few weeks ago said that Hamas views all these people as traitors who should be shot in the head for giving up the fight and fleeing. And we have video evidence of Hamas shooting at people trying to evacuate. They have planted IDEs like IEDs and things like that to explode, right? On these evacuation routes. And we've seen evidence of them, again, using snipers to pick off people who are things. Like, there are people shooting at the evacuees, but they're not the IDF. It's Hamas who wants, again, to use them as human shields.
They're just bombing all of them indiscriminately, and
you say indiscriminately, but if it was indiscriminately in this most densely packed nation, the 62nd most densely packed city in the world, the casualty rate wouldn't be 10,000. It would be like 100,000.
I don't think that the death count alone is like kind of the defense that you think it is, mostly because all that tells me is that just like it's surprising. It's likely that there's
just a real quick question.
That doesn't mean that Israel's not trying to do that effectively. When you consider the blockade, the occupation, that they can't leave, because at least in other countries when there's war zones, you can flee, right? You can attempt to get away from it. But all these people can do is move what is one of the most densely populated areas in the whole world twice as densely populated over by forcing them into the other part of Gaza, right? And like, I don't think people really conceptualize the panic that is. Like, there is difficulty evacuating even cities when there's like hurricanes
Yep.
in the United States, right? Because of the traffic that happens, people's cars run out of gas, right? So like initially, right, again, if Israel had it their way and they didn't succumb to any international pressure to change giving these people 24 hours, if they had it their way, they would give people 24 hours to flee. And this includes people that are elderly, people that are disabled, people that have to be convinced to leave all their worldly possessions behind, leave behind family mementos, leave behind toys for your kids, leave behind family pictures, leave behind even packing, right? And just go to the other side. Like, it would be,
yes.
for us, like, if you had to evacuate...
If a thing that didn't actually happen had happened, it would be worse. Absolutely. But that's not what happened. What happened is Israel did succumb to international pressure and gave them a week in advance and are currently aiding in the evacuation of civilians. And let me ask you a question. If Israel was just indiscriminately killing Gazans, right? Palestinians just willy-nilly, right? Indiscriminately. Why does Hamas wear civilian clothing and use civilian infrastructure to blend in? If it had no effect on Israel's waging war, it had no effect on their ability to target and destroy Hamas, why would they do that? Because again, if, as you say, it was simply indiscriminate, it wouldn't have any effect. It would provide no cover. It would provide no defense at all. They would just kill them, blow them away, bomb them, right? But they're not doing that. Instead, Hamas is acting as if, right? And we have all the evidence in the world that they believe and are acting as if Israel is being discriminate with its attacks.
I guess, like, the issue that I have with what you said about, like, okay, if you imagine a fantasy world where that, like, did happen, then that would be bad, but that's not the world that we live in. I would agree, but I've heard you on your stream make multiple arguments that Hamas is more dangerous because you ask the question that if Hamas had the power and the funding of the IDF, what do you think they would do to Israel, right? And that would be an extremely grisly, bloody image that I don't even want to conceive of, because I would agree with you. It would likely not bode well for any civilian, Palestinian or Israeli, or any foreign national who is in that area, for anyone there, because I don't think that they necessarily have any regard for civilian life, as they've demonstrated. So I would agree with you there, but you're engaging in that sort of hypothetical to point out that, like, Hamas is worse than Israel. But then when I point out, like, what is hardly, I guess, to me, like a hypothetical, because I'm just going off of Israel's stated plan and trying to eliminate the variables that end up making them adjust their plan, which are international pressure and pressure from, like, the United States.
But even
and
24-hour notice? Let's go with that. Okay, let's go with that. Okay, fair enough.
Which
even in your hypothetical, where they only gave 24-hour notice, and they kept cutting off the food, water, power, all of that, right? It would still be better than Hamas's stated goals, right? It would still be more notice than Hamas would ever give to the Israelis, right? So even in that worst case scenario, right?
I don't want to hold Israel to the standard of, is it better than Hamas, because that's an extremely low bar to clear.
That's the debate. That's what you called me to talk about.
If the control variable is always just Hamas rather than who is more likely to be in flagrant violation of international humanitarian law time and time again,
Hamas.
I would say it's Israel.
Still, Hamas
because I think people look at October 7th and they rightfully have the horror of seeing the massacre of civilians. It's senseless, right? But it's mostly because, I guess, it's short range that people seem to think that it is less grisly or somehow more inhumane than Israel dropping white phosphorus from the sky on a civilian population that can't leave.
Do you have evidence of them with dropping? Because I've seen people post things about how Amnesty International and things have said about the white phosphorus, but I've not seen.
Do you just mean for this recent attack or in the past? Because
for the recent attack. In the past, I'll just grant it to you, right? But no, I even there, I do think that Hamas is. So here's the difference between Hamas and Israel, okay, and the IDF, to be clear, because again, we're not talking about Palestinians, we're talking about Hamas. Just as, like, we're not talking about Israelis, we're talking about the IDF. Okay, I want to make that distinction clear. Right. The difference here is that when Hamas attacks, they only target the military so that they can be uninterrupted in their slaughter of their civilians. Whereas the IDF, again, they only kill civilians so that they can get to the military targets. And you can say, and I would agree, that they do not give enough, right? They do not take enough care to prevent civilian deaths. 100%. I'm with you. This is not an argument that we have. But again, these are not the same things. These are very different things. And the Hamas attacks and the brutality of it, the targeting of it, the proportionality of it, all of that is just far, far worse than the Israeli, as bad as it is, the blockade, the settlements in the West Bank, all of it, right?
But
and again, I want to be clear. I'm not defending the West Bank settlements at all. They are horrific. They are apartheid, as I think we would agree. Like they're bad, but they are not on the same level, right? Not even close.
And I sent you 2 links from 2 different independent human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. October 31st, 2023, Amnesty reported that the Israeli army fired artillery shells containing white phosphorus, an incendiary weapon, in military operations along Lebanon's southern border between 10 and October 16th, 2023, Amnesty International said.
But are they targeting civilians with it? So you can use white phosphorus in military operations legally, right? We use it in our smoke bombs, things like that. So again, were they targeting civilians or were they simply using it as smoke? Because one you can do under an international law, it's fine, and the other you can't do. It's a war crime.
For this particular operation, are we going to have the insight into
I don't know,
deploying
is the thing.
the use of individual thing until after the fact? No, we're not going to be able to say conclusively, but there's already reports of it like this that have been verified that they are using it. The motive will eventually
so why
out,
assume
but like I argued
war crime?
that when you have
this is important. This is important to bias, right? So this is a problem I have. Like when this happens, the assumption automatically is, oh my God, it's a war crime. It's indiscriminate. They're killing all the babies. Like Israel is just being the worst possible actor it could possibly be. Why?
Because I don't think that Israel has demonstrated that they really have an interest in ending the occupation of Gaza.
No, that's fair. Yeah, that I would agree with you that it's at least the current administration, but that is a far different thing than, I don't think they, because let's listen to what you said, that I don't think they have interest in ending the occupation in Gaza, so I think they'll kill all the babies on purpose. Right? What? Like there's a leap that we're taking here that's skipping over a lot of things.
But I didn't just say that out of nowhere. I said that with three. I don't even think that I got to mention the third thing. But again, when the defense minister, in the context of him announcing a complete and total siege on all of Gaza, on 2.3 million people, the vast 98% of which are civilians, right? No food, no fuel, no water, nothing. So you're announcing that, and we put a pin in that. President Isaac Herzog not ruling out, this is from the Huffington Post. Israeli president suggests that civilians in Gaza are legitimate targets. The quote being, "It is an entire nation that out there that is responsible," Isaac Herzog said, as Israel ordered 1.1 million Palestinians to evacuate their homes. It is not true, this rhetoric about civilians not being aware, not involved. It's absolutely not true. They could have risen up. They could have fought against that evil regime which took over Gaza in a coup d'etat.
Keep reading. Because the reporter asked him a follow-up question.
Asked Herzog to clarify whether he meant to say that since Gazans did not remove Hamas from power, that makes them by implication legitimate targets. The Israeli president claimed, "No, I didn't say that."
So yes. Stop. Because again, you presented this as Huffington Post saying that this guy said they were legitimate targets, but then when you read the article and you carry on past the point where you stopped reading, you see that, in fact, when he was asked this, do you consider them legitimate targets? He said, no, I did not say that.
Do you agree? Do you trust him? Do you think that he genuinely thinks that?
Do I trust him? I can look at the behaviors that they've been doing. I don't have to trust them. I can see what they're doing.
Well, you asked me to read it because you said, hold on. He clarified because he realized, okay, there's a problem here because they think they actually heard what I was saying, which is that I was implying that civilians are legitimate targets, right? And they are responsible for this in some way. But then he stated, when you have a missile in your goddamn kitchen, you want to shoot it at me. Am I allowed to defend myself? At another point in the press conference,
Herzog presented, by the way, in international law, like if they are storing munitions in your house is no longer a civilian infrastructure. It is now a military target.
At another point in the press conference, Herzog presented a different perspective, saying, of course, there are many Palestinians who don't agree to this, but unfortunately, in their homes, there are missiles shooting at us, at my children. Herzog's comments follow Israel's announcement that it had directed the 1.1 million residents of northern Gaza to evacuate, likely ahead of a ground invasion. Israel dropped thousands of flyers. Yes, yes, yes. We know that the evacuation was impossible. We also know that as they were trying to flee, they bombed the crossing, right?
There is that is a report, though. There again, I want to wait for the ICC to come in and verify that it was actually Israel that did that and not the Hamas, right?
But I'm like taking that into context.
Wait. Why are we so keen? Why are we so keen on the hospital getting ICC investigated? But when it comes to the white phosphorus, when it comes to this supposed bombing of this passage, suddenly we're like, oh no, we know this is true. We don't even have to investigate. We just know it, right? Why is there this double standard here going on?
No, well, I don't think it's accurate to say that like there's a double standard, because there are instances where things have already been independently verified because they've not completely barred press from coming in and conducting certain investigations and reporting on these things on the ground. But we can't categorically say that they have allowed them access to everything. And in each individual instance, like, yes. Like, some things were reported without contention, right? Other things were reported. There was leaks that Israel had targeted that area for bombing and that it was bombed, you know? I don't think it's irrational, but I would agree. I do think that we should wait for independent things for us to be able to say conclusively, but based on the evidence that's available now, I don't think that an independent investigation is going to reveal anything that's much different than in those specific instances that we've talked about. Then yes, it's likely that Israel, if there's leaks of the plans for them to target that area and then it is subsequently bombed, I do think evidence currently points in the direction that yes, we can it will be verified at one point that yeah, they likely did that. They're likely responsible
very possible.
for
if
it.
They did that, shame on them. War crime. Hold the people who made those decisions responsible and acted those decisions responsible. Absolutely, 100%. But we also have evidence, right? A great deal of evidence that Israel isn't just mowing down evacuees, right? In fact, they're protecting them and they're escorting them to safety.
Bibi also said that this would be the longest war. The longest operation, right, that they have had was Operation Protective Edge, and that was 51 days. So again, if you take into consideration the dehumanization of Palestinians, right, the president insinuating that civilians are somehow responsible for Hamas's actions and implicating them and saying that they might actually be legitimate military targets because they had
you keep repeating that, but he said the exact opposite of that. You keep repeating. You didn't trust it, but now you're defending
it because you're saying that I should believe him when he clarifies, even though I don't think that he really is being very honest when he says that in the context of a siege being announced.
Okay. Yeah, this is a problem.
In the context of defending a siege against millions of people,
but what
with
you can't say is that he called them legitimate targets when the article that you were citing, your source, says the opposite of what you said.
I didn't say that he called them legitimate targets. I said that he insinuated heavily, given the type of rhetoric that he was espousing at the time. Then he was asked to clarify, and he backs off of that very slightly. But they did not change that there would still be a total siege on the civilian population of Gaza that cannot leave.
They are not sieging the civilian population of Gaza. If they were sieging the civilian population of Gaza, they wouldn't let anyone out. They're sieging Hamas, right?
I think that people can't leave Gaza. What do you know that people cannot leave Gaza?
They can leave the war. They can leave the operation.
They can't leave a 5 by 25 mile, what is effectively an open air prison or concentration
camp. The Gaza Strip. So there's a strip of land, and then there's the city itself, the city proper. That's where the operations are being conducted currently, right? So the evacuation order, where they want to get to safety, where they want to create these safe zones, is from Gaza City itself. So they're asking people, in fact, ordering them to evacuate the combat area so that they can conduct their combat area without killing civilians. That is
they said
goal.
You have to leave or die, right? They said you have 24 hours because there's a difference between their announced plan and the plan after pressures are exerted, right?
Again, I don't care what
leave at gunpoint, or there will be a bomb that ends up killing you and destroying your home, right? That is forcibly transferring a civilian population.
That is getting them out of the line of fire because a terrorist, state-sponsored terrorist ISIS-like organization is holding them hostage.
In combination with no food, no water, no fuel. Nothing to sustain
this announced plan
life.
That didn't actually occur, right? They didn't actually do this, right? So they may have talked to big game, but when the push came to shove, when rubber meets the road, when they actually implemented these decisions, that's not how it worked out. So I don't trust what they say. It's words and deeds. And this is a problem here. Like, they could hot air is hot air. Don't tell me what you're going to do. Show me what you're going to do. The weight is what they do, not what they say. And when, again, I can agree with you that they don't take as much care as they should. But they do, again, we have evidence of them actually evacuating people to safety.
But there is a difference between, because they didn't change the total complete siege order. What they did is instead they let other humanitarian groups come in and give the civilian population food and water, not nearly as much as they should do. What is that?
Are you saying that is a bad thing? That they oh my God, Israel, they let humanitarian organizations in to give the people food and water. What monsters?
They occupy those 2.3 that area. There's a blockade on those 2.3 million people who can't leave. They cannot leave this 5 by 25 mile effectively concentration camp or open air prison. They're completely responsible for everything that goes in, everything that goes out. That doesn't just that's not rendered moot because it's wartime. They still have an obligation under international humanitarian law to give these people just the necessary amount, like food, water, resources to sustain life. They didn't have to do a siege. You said it was a tactical mistake yourself. There's no military advantage to doing it. So why do they do it?
Wait, when I said there was no military advantage to
what military advantage is there
to keep Hamas from getting away? So one of the problems
you already said Hamas has food, water, and fuel already stocked up. So at this point, they're
are you talking about the food and water? Yeah, I did say that cutting off the food and water was probably a mistake. Yes, but that's not what you said. I said right.
Why would they do it?
Because they want to try to starve out Hamas. But again, like you said, that was a bad idea.
Civilian population, unless they overthrow them.
But again, they didn't actually do this. They have let food and water into the area, right? So again, they talked a big game, but when it came to the rubber meets the road, and you can say it's by international pressures that they bowed to, fair enough. Right? But that's, again, the difference. And as we're, again, the whole point of this conversation, which is worse, which is more of an obstacle to peace, Hamas cannot be reasoned with, whereas Israel can. Because just from the evidence you've presented today, where you show what they said they were going to do, then after the international pressure came in, what they actually did shows that they can be worked with, shows that they can be pressured, that they can be influenced. Hamas, however, despite all the pressures put upon them, cannot be influenced, cannot be reasoned with, or they just have to be removed. And the reason that they're putting a siege, if I may, the reason they're putting a siege on this is so that they don't get away, right? They want to make sure that the people who are operating, who planned and conducted the October 7th operation, they don't get away. They want to make sure that the hostages, and I hope some are still alive. I don't know if they are, but I hope some are still alive, that they don't run their hostages off to some foreign country and we never see them again, right? So there is absolutely a reason to limit Hamas's ability to move and maneuver, and that's not a bad thing.
I have to say that if hostages aren't alive, it's first and foremost because Hamas possibly have killed them. I wouldn't be surprised about that. But it may also be because Israel has bombed them. That is an entirely very possible thing. All of this is supposedly in the name of getting those hostages home, right? And they're doing things that are directly putting civilians and hostages in harm's way. But I'll ask you this, Wick. Do you think that were it not for the international pressure that was put on the Israeli government following the announcement of their plan that they continued to basically enact even with the pressure, because they're not really listening or being receptive to the United States' pressure other than just like on the humanitarian things, do you think that without any pressure, they would have reversed course on any of what they've been doing so far? On like the food and water.
Thank you for the raid, 𝕍𝖎. Welcome. Second of all, I don't know. And I honestly don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what would have happened had if America and the international community had just said, deal with it, we don't care what you do whatever you want. It's very possible, as you suggest, that they would have kept it to 24 hours notice, that they would have turned off the food, water, electricity, fuel forever. I don't know, right? Very possible. It's also possible, however, that, again, because Israel is not a monolith, there are, other than Likud, other politicians within that are voices of peace in this, and we can't forget that, right? There are people in right, Israel, that want to limit the damage more than Likud wants to limit the damage to Gaza and things like that. And they are influencing and exerting pressures of their own. So do I know whether they would have been successful outside of international pressure? I don't know. And I can't answer that. Sorry.
We can't answer that, but I would say based on their actions in the past and in this past operation for Operation Swords of Iron, I don't think that absent any international pressure, they would have been giving the civilian population of Gaza any food, any water, any fuel. I don't think that they would have discontinued the aerial bombardment. I don't think that they are taking the proper precautions because I don't think that they care, because I basically think that what is going on constitutes genocide, even though I'm not a legal scholar. I'm not a humanitarian scholar, so that's just my layman's opinion based off the arguments that I've made. But I would feel comfortable calling that, but I really don't even need people to call it a genocide, because even just what I'm describing that is a plan for death, in my opinion, especially upon a civilian population that is not responsible for Hamas and that has no means of escaping Gaza. They're stuck there because Israel keeps them there.
But again, the operation isn't in Gaza, it's in Gaza City, and you keep making this conflation of the two things. There is no military operation going on in Gaza that isn't involved in the Gaza City.
In a 5 by 25 mile
and we have had hundreds of thousands of people who have evacuated Gaza City successfully. We have hundreds of thousands of people who've gotten out of that war zone to safety. Not as many as we would have liked, not as many as should have, right? But to act as if they are just all stuck with no way out, right? It's just not true. Even today, there are people getting out of the city. They are there today.
Even before that, yes. But when you say they are, you said
getting out of the area of operation where the bombing is being conducted.
Okay. What is their fate? A refugee camp? Literally just a tent?
Better than a bomb.
Again, on average, they have 2 pieces of bread to look for. So cool, you didn't die in the aerial bombardment. You didn't have a bomb dropped on you. Here's what you have to look forward to. All of the water in Gaza, for the most part, is poison. Like 98% of Gaza's water is not fit for human consumption.
Thank God they're letting humanitarian aid in, and thank God they're letting trucks with humanitarian aid to help that.
Israel controls that, and they're not doing anything.
No, they do control that. They do control access. They do control access, and because they control access, they are letting in the humanitarian aid. They did not have to, and yet they are doing it anyway.
Do you think it should be framed as kind of like a humanitarian gesture or a kindness to allow people food, water, basic necessities so they don't die?
What you are claiming,
under the purview of the Israeli government,
is that they want to just genocide all the Gazans. That's your claim.
Because what they announced was a death plan. What they announced is a plan for death. Do you know how long a human can live without water? You can live without water for 3 days and then you die.
The bombing has been going on how long?
Over a month, since October 8th.
And yet, somehow, 2.2 million Gazans are able to go without water, quote unquote, for 30 days. That's weird, huh?
Before that was even happening, half of Gaza suffered from extreme food insecurity. 98% of their water was not fit for human consumption because it could not be desalinated because it's poisoned effectively. So even prior to all of this, there were great humanitarian concerns. Half of Gaza is unemployed, right? The occupation is effectively a pressure cooker and just radicalizing people daily because most of these people have never left.
They were
born into that camp and they have never been outside. Is it right to keep people in a 5 by 25 mile thing?
I'm not here to defend the current blockade of Gaza or the current occupation. That is not the purpose.
You did earlier though, because said
I defended the initial blockade.
Reasons.
I defended the initial decision to blockade. I think there's reasonable after Hamas gave Fatah flying lessons. I think that was a reasonable thing for security purposes to initiate an initial blockade, right? I think that's true. However, as I said earlier in the conversation, at a certain point, it became something, again, they didn't work towards ending it and things, and that's when it became immoral. I'm not here. I am an advocate for a 2-state solution, which means the ending of the occupation, the international establishment of Palestine as a state, right? And the details have to be worked out by minds far wiser than I do. But to act, right, as if Israel, and we've seen this again and again and again, when there's evidence that Hamas bombed that hospital, you're like, well, we have to wait for the ACC. We can't make any declarations to see. However, if someone just says, hey, they use white phosphorus here, war crime, killing babies, killing civilians, no investigation needed. Let's just go with it. When there's when someone says, hey, they bombed this evacuation route, the IDF bombed this evacuation route. No need to wait for investigation. No need to wait for evidence. They must have did it. They must be bad. Oh, again, the very dishonest, and I'm shocked that you did this. The dishonest quote from that Huffington Post article about the guy who said, where you said and implied heavily, and you only kept reading because I made you kept reading, that he said that they were legitimate war targets, when in fact he did not say that, and he in fact, when challenged on it, he directly condemned that and did walk it back. Right? So again, all these things come into place to show this very like demonization of
I'm quoting Israeli officials. Wick, I am quoting Israeli officials.
You're quoting parts of them. You are quoting parts of what they say.
No,
you are not quoting what they say. And we saw this in the Huffington Post as a great example of this.
You believe that when Herzog reversed course on that and he said, I didn't say that, after heavily implying, you believe him. Earlier you said you couldn't say for sure, but now you believe him that he really didn't mean to insinuate what he did.
The reason I believe him is because how they've acted since.
Which only with international pressure did they. And again, they didn't stop the siege. They didn't reverse the siege. They just allowed other countries to pick up the slack of their blockade, their occupation, and what is effective. Gaza is a man-made humanitarian crisis that is on Israel. Israel is the occupying power that everybody else has to bear the burden of.
Gaza is the humanitarian crisis made by Israel, but the bombing is a humanitarian crisis made by Hamas. If Hamas had not come in on October 7th, there would be no bombs being dropped on Gaza City right now. There would be no people without food or water. There would be no people without power and fuel. That is on Hamas. As much as Gaza in and of itself is on Israel, I will agree with you on that. You have to admit that October 7th is the cause, the reason to tear that they are bombing right now. That without that as a factor and a variable, we would not be having this discussion today.
Do you think that the blockade makes it more likely to have radicals and extremists like Hamas and people willing to be sympathetic and sympathize with Hamas? Do you think the blockade exacerbates that and leads more people to want to align with Hamas against Israel? Or do you think it decreases it and increases sympathy for Israel from within Gaza?
I think that it does help radicalize people, but let's look at the numbers here. How many members of Hamas in Gaza right now?
About 30 to 40,000.
How many total people in Gaza?
There's 2.3 million people.
So that's less than 1%. So even after all that, right? There is some evidence to suggest this isn't just me talking, right? That this idea of extreme poverty increasing radicalization, that's not entirely held up by evidence, because a lot of ISIS fighters, a lot of other resistance fighters come from middle class kind of families and things like that. A lot of the leadership comes from the higher class.
I'm just saying, does it make it more likely that they will align themselves with Hamas? Or does it make them more likely to be sympathetic?
Maybe, perhaps.
That's why. Do you think that it's rational for a country to think that they can continue to dispossess a group of people and to subjugate them, keep them under an illegal blockade, an illegal occupation, and think that that is not basically a pressure cooker for radicalization that leads to more events like October 7th in the future? So I don't want another October 7th.
I don't want
that. Never should have fucking happened.
And that's why I want Hamas to be eliminated, because Hamas has said, that they want to do as many October 7th as it can. Do you think a ceasefire? Okay, so we have a ceasefire and Hamas keeps firing. Does IDF have to not shoot back?
No, we already talked about how they can do special operations. There's absolutely no reason for them to be punishing the civilian population in favor of getting what you just said is less than 1%. It's less than 2% of the population in Gaza. That they have to wage this war, drop all of these bombs, drop white phosphorus, drop all of this on a civilian population to get a network of criminals.
They're not dropping it on civilians. They're dropping it on military targets.
But Wick, okay. Does anybody believe a group like Hamas, when they used to do this in the early 2000s, to my knowledge, when they would have suicide bombings and hit buses and they would kill all the civilians inside? would you believe that Hamas when they say we're not trying to hit the civilians inside the bus, we're just trying to blow up the bus? Would you believe them?
No, but you know what? They didn't say
Right?
that. They
So
said, no, we
why
were
is
trying
it
to kill the people in the bus. That's what they said. So if they had said that, no, obviously I wouldn't believe them.
But why is it when Israel says that we are not trying to kill civilians in a building, we're just trying to get the one terrorist in a building, when they level a building, when they completely bomb it, why does nobody laugh in their fucking face for that? That is
because we have evidence to suggest what they're saying is true. Whereas, again, Hamas didn't even say that they were trying to limit civilian casualties. Hamas has said they're trying to exacerbate civilian casualties. And in fact, Hamas has said that they're trying to exacerbate civilian casualties in Gaza. That has been their stated goal. And yes, I do believe them when they say that, because it falls in line with their actions. So yes, there is evidence to suggest, and again, I won't say that every single strike that the IDF made has been abided by this principle, and I do believe that they've committed war crimes, absolutely. But to act as if the whole bombing campaign is a war crime is just patently false.
Well, then okay, so the way that you take Hamas at their word, yeah, that's why I said I believe the Minister of Defense for Israel when he announces a total siege and says that we're dealing with human animals. I believe him when he says that. I believe President Herzog when he insinuates that he doesn't really want to acknowledge the difference between civilians and military targets.
But you don't believe him when he takes that back. But you don't believe him when he takes back. It's selective belief. Okay.
I believe he was trying to cover his ass, yeah. But I don't believe he actually was really taking that back. Sure, and I believe Bibi when he says this should be the longest war, which Israelis have no appetite for because Israel is the 5th happiest country in the entire world.
The longest war was 52 days prior to this, so that could be like 2 months. It could be 2 months. It could be it could be 52.
And Israel already announced. Israel has already announced that they're probably going to have to cease activities in the next couple of weeks because of international pressures. So they're saying...
Have they, though? Because I don't think they have.
Yes, they have. I can link you an article from Haaretz.
Maybe.
So they would love to keep going. They would love to keep going. But unfortunately, all the other countries that back them, because so much of the Israeli government is dependent upon other foreign countries giving them money for their defense budget. That's the reason why.
How much do you think is their? How much of their defense budget do you think is foreign aid? There's an answer to this.
I'm not sure how much of it, but I know 16%. A lot of it is. Do you think
60% of their military budget is from foreign aid?
A significant percent, Wick.
That is a significant percent, but it's not like this like existential thing, right?
Wick, do you think that Israel would be okay if it's just 16%, right? If that 16% were withdrawn, do you think Israel would be a-okay? If it's just 16%, you think that would make almost no difference because they're so independently reliable? They're not a client state.
I don't know.
I think it would make a significant dent, and they know that, which is why it's of utmost importance to them to always have the backing of these other countries because they know how much they rely on them for that 16%.
I think if that 16% was withdrawn and they did feel an existential crisis, you would see indiscriminate at that point.
Because if it's just 16%, then would you support getting rid of it? Because it's like, it's just 16%. Let's just get rid of it.
I think there is an argument to lessen the funding of Israel. Yes.
But if you could pull a lever and go and change it from 16% to
0,
to 0 from
today?
Outside, they have to. Yep.
Today? I don't know. I'd think about it. I would consider it. I don't know if I would, because again, I think Hamas, for the safety not just of Israel, but of Gaza and of Palestine as a whole, I think that Hamas's existence is a threat and they need to be gone.
Wait, do you know how many people? Do you know what the Hamas presence is in the West Bank?
It's very little.
It's very little. Do you know how many Palestinians have died since, I think, 2008 in the West Bank?
More than should have. 200 something?
About 6,500, give or take.
In the West Bank?
In the West Bank. 6,500 Palestinian civilians have died since either 2006 or 2008.
Oh, since 2006. I was about to say, in the last month? Wow. That's...
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. I was like, wow, I've never heard that. I was like, that's crazy. You like me the source, but okay, since 2006, fair enough. Yeah, no. Again, the West Bank is a war crime. It's apartheid. I agree.
You just said there's almost no Hamas presence there. Why are there so many civilian deaths from Palestinians?
Because Netanyahu and Likud and those West Bank settlers are war criminals.
Israel, yes, because of Israel.
Yes,
which to me, again,
but that doesn't mean
the West Bank.
But that doesn't mean
of Israel.
But that doesn't mean
in Gaza, which is because of Israel's actions.
Do you
I see
think
Israel as
October?
more
I'll just ask you.
responsible.
I'll just ask you directly then. Because of that, because you view Israel as war criminals, do you think that the October 7th attack on the civilians was justified by Hamas?
No, of course not.
Okay, fair enough.
There's absolutely, I don't think that liberation groups, defensive groups, even when they're under occupation, should be exempt from being held to account in at the
Absolutely.
ICC, or they're not free from being held to account to those laws. So yes, that absolutely occurs to them. All of those people who went though are dead because it was basically a suicide mission. Because in 2012, the UN said that Gaza would be unlivable by 2020. It's now 2023. So those people in Gaza had basically been left to die, because that was not a national conversation until October 7th. They had no prospects.
Wait a minute. You wasn't a... Wait, whoa. You don't think we were talking about this before October 7th?
No. It had largely been... The only thing that we were talking about was rocket attacks towards Israelis. But
do you not remember the March on of Return back in 2018? That sparked discussion. I wasn't on this space particularly. I wasn't in the Twitch poll space. But that sparked international discussion. The Israel-Palestine conflict is something that I've heard of, discussed my entire fucking life. Right? This is something that's not new. It's not something that we just started talking about. It's something that since before I was born, we have been going over both on a policy executive level and amongst people, right? And you can say that we haven't had a robust enough conversation. There's too much propaganda. Fair enough, right? But to act as if we weren't having a conversation about this is wild.
No, but a conversation that led anywhere, because have the changes in Gaza and have the conditions in Gaza since 2018 changed from then to 2023 to now? Have they changed at all, really?
Well, right now they're probably worse, but
probably worse. That's what I just said. They had been left to die. Because you just said they got worse since 2018.
They're not, okay, being left to die. This is such a weird way to put it, right? Being left to die. We have had people trying to get aid in there for years, right? We've had a lot of people. I think 𝙎𝖎 raised $250,000 a couple of years ago for to help. The problem here is
Israel's not going to do it.
And the reason this aid isn't helping.
Israel's not going to do it.
The reason this aid isn't helping, even though it is getting into Gaza, it's getting into Gaza. But why do you think it's not helping? Why do you think that aid's going to? Is it the Gazan people, or is it perhaps Hamas taking it, building rockets, digging up the pipelines that have been established there in order to fire at Israeli civilians to kill them?
Wait, did you just insinuate that the humanitarian group that 𝙎𝖎 raised a bunch of money for was basically funneling money to terrorists?
No, I'm insinuating that when it got there, Hamas took it from the people.
That's what it does.
Do you not think... Wait, whoa. Do you think Hamas doesn't steal from its people?
I'm sure they do.
Okay, so when the people of Gaza get stuff that is supposed to aid them, go to their civilian infrastructure, building wells, building aquifers, all that, Hamas instead takes that money and builds weapons of war, tunnels to go in and to fight the IDF and get rid of Israel. That's what's happening here. The people of Gaza are oppressed by Hamas. More, first and foremost, by Hamas, and then by a second order by Israel.
Wait, does that mean, because so inevitably humanitarian aid that is rendered to Palestinian civilians and children, that it shouldn't be donated because it's going to end up in the hands of terrorists if they steal it?
Absolutely not. Aid in the form of food, water, other supplies, absolutely is again, not again. That's still stolen by Hamas on occasion, but that's much more than just fun. Like, again, that doesn't mean we shouldn't give humanitarian aid, because some gets
even if some will go to Gaza. Even if a lot, you just insinuated that a lot of it goes to Hamas.
Yes, a lot of it does.
Okay, so then you're saying that any humanitarian effort...
this is not a binary thing, right? This isn't a binary thing where we have to give them all the funding or none of the funding. We can say that we have to recognize when you do give humanitarian aid to Gaza, some of it goes to Hamas. Can we agree on that?
Yeah.
Okay, I know that. That's all I'm saying.
That doesn't to me. That's not an argument against rendering humanitarian aid to this, because
some
of it.
Good thing I didn't argue against you rendering a humanitarian aid. Good thing I was arguing that the reason that they're in a humanitarian crisis is because Hamas steals their humanitarian aid. Good thing that's what I was arguing, and not what you were insinuating that I was arguing. That's all I'm saying.
But if you're saying they steal it and they use it not only to hurt the civilian population in Gaza, but to hurt the civilian population in Israel,
Yep.
then you're funding terrorism by de facto. You end up being a proxy for that and being party to that.
That is a bitter pill to swallow, but it is, again, you have to, because we do recognize there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. So you, again, in Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International, all these other organizations recognize that, unfortunately, when you are working in a zone that is run by an authoritarian, disgusting regime, that some of their stuff that you try to help the people with is going to be skimmed off of, taken off the top. That doesn't mean we don't help them, right? We just acknowledge that a lot of the reason that they're in a crisis isn't just because of Israel, but is because of Hamas themselves taking away humanitarian aid that is meant to go to the Gazan citizens. And that's my argument. Not that we should stop, not that we shouldn't do it, not that we should stop giving. We absolutely should. But again, if Hamas is allowed to exist, it doesn't matter what Israel does, because Gaza will never be free.
Okay,
and I want Gaza to be free.
Israel should give them fuel, right? They should give them fuel.
If Israel gave them fuel, right? That right now probably not. Right now probably not. But normally they should. Yes.
How gracious of them to give the population that they keep under their subjugation with the basic necessities that they need. I don't think Palestinians should be reliant upon the humanitarian aid and goodwill and charity.
Then you need to get rid of Hamas. I agree. Then Hamas needs to go. I'm glad we agree.
Okay, so if we're like, you agree.
Wait, who do you think is stopping Hamas? Who do you think is stopping civilian infrastructure, food, water, aquifers, and stuff from being built in Gaza?
Oh, Israel. Israel's the occupying power.
No! Hamas is stopping it. Hamas is doing that. Hamas is saying, if you do this, you're a collaborator and we will kill you.
Doesn't Hamas want civilian infrastructure built in Gaza so they can operate out of it? I thought you were saying that earlier.
Hamas uses hospitals, bakeries, homes, etc. in order to operate out of it. Yes, but what they don't want to do is give their people... They don't want to... The aid money coming to them, they want to use it first and foremost primarily for their ability to do, again, as they say they want to, October 7th, over and over and over again, in perpetuity, until Israel is gone and wiped off the face of the earth.
I think Israel's response,
I know you think it is, but again, you've shown large amount of bias.
I definitely have bias. But like the occupation does not end up in like the authority that the PA has, that Hamas has, does not change the fact that Israel is the occupier. So that is effectively like comparing.
So Israel cannot end the occupation. If it ends Hamas does not let it. Every time
you just said Israel can end the occupation.
If it ended the occupation today, what do you think would happen?
Like in the immediate future,
yes, right
or like
now.
long term?
Right now.
I think there would be absolutely less violence, because I think the maintenance of the occupation is way more violent than the lifting of the occupation and the lifting of the illegal blockade.
We saw what would happen on October 7th. That's all I'll say, and that's all we're in this, because I do have another appointment from Mantis, who's going to come on to argue with me. But I want to give you a chance to have a closing statement and the last words. So I'm going to give my closing statement first, and then you can give your closing statement and tell people where they can find you. But I want you to have the last word. And I want to, first of all, thank you for coming here. Thank you for having this debate with me. Thank you for having this argument with me. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it. I hope that you did too. When it comes down to Israel and Hamas, Israel and Palestine, no one's hands are free of blood in this conflict. Israel has a lot to answer for. Israel has committed war crimes and continues to commit war crimes, especially in the West Bank. Right? I'm not denying that. I am not defending that. Under no way, shape, or form am I doing that. The people of Gaza are victims here. The people of Gaza are victims both of Israel and Hamas. Hamas victimizes them in order to strike at Israel. And a lot of people, leftists in the West included, sitting at their computers typing from their safe keyboards, are using the Palestinians as pawns in their hatred of Israel and their hatred of Zionism. However, there is no moral equivalence between Israel and its enemies here. Hamas, on every metric, by every measure we can look at, is worse. they will do worse. Again, every time a Gazan, and to be clear, a Palestinian Gazan tries to work for peace, they are captured and interrogated and tortured and, in many cases, killed because they are collaborators. Amnesty International says this in 2015 report they released. In 2020, there was another report where, again, a Gazan citizen, Aman, was, again, kidnapped and tortured along with 6 of his fellows. For what crime? For speaking with the enemy on Skype, for working towards people's peace. Hamas has no interest in peace and will do everything in its power to stop it from happening. Israel, in contrast, has demonstrated on several occasions that they are willing to work towards ending the occupation. The 2000 election was won on that note of ending the occupation. The Oslo Accords was won on that note of ending the occupation. Did it work out? No. Does Israel have problems with right-wing extremism? Yes. Are they a problem? Are they an obstacle? Yes. But when it comes to who is the biggest obstacle, by every metric we have, it's very clear. Hamas is. Thank you for your time, and your turn. Go ahead.
I want to say that obviously what happened on October 7th was an atrocity of a large scale, and that I don't think that it's appropriate or moral or just or correct at all for Hamas to have taken any hostages to try to leverage them or deprive them of their humanity and their just the dignity that every human and individual deserves. So I think that all of the hostages should be released. I also think that Israel should let go of the 2.3 million hostages that they have that are kept in Gaza under a brutal, illegal, immoral blockade that they could lift, but they will not lift, even though they signed an agreement after Operation Protective Edge that they would lift the blockade. The blockade is never lifted. They never ended the occupation formally. I think the occupation needs to end. And in the same way that Hamas needs to let go of their hostage, I think Israel needs to let go of the 2.3 million civilians living in Gaza, for the most part, that should be allowed freedom of movement and be able to take their fate into their own hands and not have it be determined by the state of Israel, which is the occupying power. And even Hamas's authority, the small amount of authority that they had, is not ever going to supersede the authority that the occupying power Israel has over that entire civilian population that manages who goes in, who goes out, if they get food, if they get water, if they get fuel, if they're going to have a job or not, for the most part. I don't think that's correct, and I would hope that people would join me in calling for a ceasefire, in ending the blockade, in ending the occupation. And I want to shout out voices like Jewish Voice for Peace that largely celebrate celebrate any humanitarian efforts that are trying to be given and rendered to Palestinian people right now. That have been these Jewish groups are being branded as anti-Semitic by groups like the ADL, even though they're filled with Jews just advocating for peace and trying to have justice for Palestinians. And I also want to shout out the PCRF. And if you have $4 instead of spending it on like a coffee or a hot chocolate or something, please spend it donating to the PCRF, which goes directly to aid Palestinian children. I don't really want to shout myself out. I feel like it's tacky given the subject nature.
I will. Straighterade, gang. Go check her out. But no, thank you we do need to have these discussions. Gang, thank you for the donations today. Thank you to Lex Friedman for the $100. Thank you to everyone else, to Astronaut Farmer and all the others. Thank you to 𝙎𝖎 for the donations of subs. I can't do this for free. Continue to support the channel. Continue to give. And we can keep having these discussions. But yes, also, if you have money, there are relief organizations working for both Israel and Palestine, right, that are wanting to help the real victims of this conflict, which are the people on the ground, right? It's not me or you, right? It's not from our comfy chairs, but it's the people who are undergoing these terrible conditions, and they're not responsible for it. They do deserve relief. So please, give if you can. And if you could post the links to those organizations in my chats, that would be wonderful to do. But as I said, content's not ending. I do have one more person I wanted to talk with today. I was hoping to wrap this up at 8, but we were a little late, but it's okay.
Sorry about that, Wick, and thank you. I appreciate the conversation.
Okay, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.